My name is Henry Dalton, 70 years old, and I never thought my own blood would plan my exit like a business deal. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday night. I had just finished my dinner when my phone, lying face down on the counter, began to buzz. It was my son. We talked briefly. He asked the usual questions, the ones that sound polite but mean nothing. When the call ended, I set the phone aside. But then I heard voices. He hadn't hung up. Through the tiny speaker, I heard him say, "He's getting slower every day. It's time for a nursing home." Someone else laughed softly and replied, "Once he's there, the house will be easy to handle." My hand froze on the table. Every muscle in my body went cold. I didn't shout. I didn't call back. Instead, I listened, word by word, to my own child discussing how to remove me from the home I built with my late wife. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at the framed photo of her smile. I didn't cry. I made a decision. If they wanted to get rid of me, I'd make sure they'd lose something far greater in return. And 1 week later, on the doorstep of the house they thought would be theirs, they found a note, and when they read it, they started screaming, "Stay with me till the end," because what I did next wasn't revenge, it was justice written in ink and silence. I woke with the kind of clarity that arrives after a line has been crossed. The night before had redrawn the map of my life, and by morning I knew what to defend. I ate in silence, cleared the plate, and opened the file drawer where my wife's handwriting still labeled the folders. Mortgage, insurance, tax receipts, proof that I had built a life and kept it in order. Nostalgia would be a trap. Memory softens edges and excuses what should never be excused. Still, as I scanned the paperwork, brief scenes surfaced. The first coat of paint over bare drywall, the afternoon sun on new tile, the night my wife laughed at a crooked curtain rod and made me fix it before bed. The house was more than shelter. It was a record of competence. Mid-morning brought company. An old friend, Carl Benson, arrived with warmth a degree too bright. He praised the lawn and steered the talk toward managing responsibilities, hinting that paperwork can become a burden a man shouldn't carry alone. He didn't ask for anything, but every sentence angled me toward yielding control. I noted the angle and let it pass. By early afternoon, the house held more footsteps. My son, Adam Dalton, and his wife, Elise Dalton, came with careful smiles. Their eyes measured the kitchen while their mouths admired family photos. They spoke of safety, convenience, and the stress of emergencies. The subtext was clean. I should delegate decisions, preferably to them. A phrase hovered between their gestures, the convenience of a durable power of attorney, just in case. I let them believe I was considering it. I nodded at the right moments, asked neutral questions, and declined to sign anything on the spot. They left a packet on the table, heavy with highlighted lines and flags that announced where my future was expected to fit. When the door clicked shut, I washed my hands, the way a surgeon might after leaving a contaminated field. I read every line. The language compressed control into clauses: authority to manage accounts, authority to sell property, authority to arrange placement. Tidy signatures would convert a father into a task. Loneliness often disguises itself as compliance. Not today. I compared the forms with older documents in my cabinet. On a sample authorization that had appeared months ago, a looping initial looked nothing like my signature. The date format wasn't mine either. I felt no rage, only a narrowing focus. Pattern recognized. Threat confirmed. A text from Carl arrived with cheerful convenience. He could walk me through the jargon and connect me to someone who would expedite filings. I pictured a finder's fee folded into a handshake and archived the message. Then I opened my notebook and listed assets, obligations, and options. I wrote as if preparing instructions for a younger man who would not be allowed to make mistakes. A plan took shape in columns. First, verify title status. Second, isolate funds by opening a new account at a bank unconnected to past habits. Third, initiate a rapid sale to a cash buyer through a lawyer, not a friend, with clean contingencies and a firm closing date. Fourth, install a boundary: new locks, new access, new rules. Fifth, arrange an alternative residence by choice, not by force. I filed the packet into a folder labeled "Do Not Sign." The questionable sample went into a sleeve marked for counsel review. I photographed both with timestamps and saved the images to an external drive. Paper tells stories when you make it speak. Mine would say that I remained lucid, organized, and unwilling to be managed. Before the light changed, I tested the doorbell camera installed last year after porch thefts. The feed was crisp, motion alerts reliable, archived clips easy to export. I adjusted the angle to capture the threshold and the first steps into the foyer. I ended the day with a simple inventory. Medications sorted, meals planned, bills set to autopay. My calendar received 3 entries: bank, attorney, storage. No dramatic vows, no raised voice. I did not need to tell anyone what I knew. I only needed to act in a sequence that could not be interrupted. The forms on the table stayed where they were, small flags over a future that did not belong to me. I turned off the lights and slept without dreams, not because I was at peace, but because I had given my mind a list and had intended to honor it in the morning. By late morning, I walked into an office that smelled of coffee and quiet efficiency. The woman behind the desk introduced herself as Miss Pierce, a real estate attorney with silver hair pulled into a neat twist. Her eyes, calm and exacting, gave the impression of someone used to untangling other people's mistakes. I explained my reason for being there, each sentence slow and deliberate, every detail selected for precision. She listened without interruption, her pen moving across a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she asked for identification and title documents. The folder I carried contained decades of order purchase deeds, tax records, the mortgage stamped paid in full. She studied them one by one, aligning the corners before speaking. The property, she confirmed, was titled solely to me. No co-signers, no encumbrances, no legal tether that could be pulled by anyone else. For the first time in days, my chest loosened. Ownership was more than paper, it was proof of agency. Miss Pierce outlined options: listing with an agent, selling to a private investor, or transferring to a trust. Each had consequences. I asked about speed. She said cash buyers in Tampa often closed within 10 business days. She could manage the process discreetly, ensuring privacy. Her professionalism carried the weight of finality, the kind that steadies a decision already made in the heart. I authorized her to begin. The retainer fee was modest compared to peace of mind. She would contact title services that afternoon and prepare the preliminary agreement. While she organized, I sat in silence, the rhythmic scratch of her pen echoing like an anchor against drifting thoughts. When I left her office, sunlight struck hard against the glass doors. It was noon, and the city outside carried on with its noise, people hustling for goals that seemed so small compared to what I had just done. I wasn't escaping, I was reclaiming. Every betrayal required precision in response. Emotion was a luxury for those who still believed in fairness. At home, I began the second phase of my plan. I withdrew a small amount of cash and opened a new account at a branch across town, one unconnected to previous transactions. The teller processed the paperwork without comment. To her, I was another retiree rearranging finances. To me, it was the quiet formation of a barrier. That afternoon, I replaced the locks on both exterior doors. The motion was mechanical, steady, unhurried. The new hardware clicked with an unfamiliar tone, metallic and sharp. I registered the new keys in a small notebook, marked the date, and filed the old ones in an envelope labeled obsolete. Boundaries needed documentation. Even endings required order. Afterward, I checked the doorbell camera installed the previous year. I repositioned the lens to capture the full width of the porch, ensuring any visitor's face would be clear. I tested the feed through my phone crisp video, synchronized audio, time-stamped storage, a private witness that never slept. When the practical tasks were done, I sat at the kitchen table where I had once celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. The contrast between then and now was almost mathematical. One set of numbers had measured years of devotion. The new set measured hours until liberation. I wrote a checklist in block letters: confirm title search, review buyer contract, schedule final inspection. My handwriting remained steady. The house seemed to breathe differently around me. Every surface I touched carried memory, yet each memory sharpened my purpose. My wife's photograph watched from the shelf, smiling, unjudging. I spoke only in thought, assuring her that this was not vengeance but correction. Generosity, unguarded, had become a wound. This was closure by design. Evening came without ceremony. I shredded outdated financial mail and placed the remains in a sealed trash bag. Anything that tied me to the old arrangement, automatic payments, forwarding addresses, shared accounts, would end within days. Control, once surrendered in small increments of trust, was returning molecule by molecule. When I finally looked at the clock, the day had folded into darkness. My phone vibrated once, a routine alert. I ignored it until I noticed the sender. Miss Pierce. Her message was concise, professional. The buyer she'd contacted expressed strong interest. Documentation could be ready by tomorrow. But another notification appeared almost simultaneously, an unfamiliar number, official domain. The subject line read, Adult Protective Services, Scheduled Home Visit Confirmation. I stared at the screen, the glow painting the kitchen in pale blue. Someone had filed a report claiming I required supervision. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. Behind the civility of concern, I recognized strategy. Yet the thought didn't frighten me. It refined the edges of my determination. By the time the clock marked midnight, my plan was complete down to the smallest detail. Paperwork in motion, assets secured, defenses fortified. Whatever they believed they could orchestrate, they were already too late. Morning unfolded with a silence that felt deliberate, as though the air itself waited to see what I would do next. I brewed coffee, wrote the date in my notebook, and reviewed my schedule. 10 o'clock was circled in black ink. Miss Ramirez, the representative from Adult Protective Services, would arrive precisely then. The report had been filed anonymously, but anonymity does not hide motive. Concern, when manufactured, leaves a specific odor. I prepared the house as if for an audit. Medication bottles lined up by dosage time, labels facing forward. Utility bills clipped together, sorted by month. Receipts for repairs placed in a folder marked Maintenance. I wasn't cleaning. I was staging evidence of competence. Each action felt surgical, precise, almost theatrical. The goal wasn't pride. It was control over the narrative. When the knock came, I opened the door before the second tap. The woman standing outside wore a blue lanyard and a neutral expression that had learned not to trust first impressions. Her voice was even, procedural. I invited her in and offered a seat at the dining table. She thanked me and began her evaluation with practiced efficiency. I showed her the pantry organized, labeled, well-stocked. The refrigerator held cooked meals portioned for the week. I explained my exercise routine, my financial system, my contact with neighbors. Every detail built a quiet wall against assumption. She nodded occasionally, taking notes, her eyes scanning for cracks that did not exist. The questions moved from the practical to the personal. Memory, mood, social interaction. I answered in complete sentences, neither defensive nor submissive. I had nothing to prove, yet everything to demonstrate. Proof and dignity are not the same, but sometimes one must be used to defend the other. When she asked about support networks, I mentioned that I managed independently and that my son lived nearby but was busy with his own life. It was the closest I would come to confession. She didn't press further. Instead, she examined the kitchen, noted the safety handles in the bathroom, and commended the cleanliness of every surface. Her professionalism was unshakable, but I noticed her tone soften slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of self-sufficiency. While she walked through the hallway, the doorbell camera recorded everything. Entry, tour, departure. Not for vanity, not for memory, but for record. In a world where false narratives spread faster than facts, proof is oxygen. The inspection lasted 43 minutes. She concluded at the table, reviewing her checklist one final time. Her pen made deliberate marks under capable, coherent, and independent. When she spoke, her words were measured but decisive. There was no indication of neglect, no evidence of impairment, no reason for further involvement. She would close the case. Relief did not arrive as joy. It arrived as stillness. A silent confirmation that I had survived another layer of strategy aimed to weaken me. I signed her summary with a steady hand, dated it, and asked for a copy. She handed it over with a courteous nod before leaving. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly and placed the document in my cabinet. A piece of paper, yes, but one carrying the weight of autonomy. The camera feed blinked with a small notification. Motion recorded. I downloaded the clip, archived it in the same folder as my financial records, and labeled it with time and date. Order is armor. I sat back and thought of how easily a life can be rewritten by others, how a whisper of concern can become a file in a government system. Yet now, that file would carry evidence of strength, not weakness. Those who had filed the report would expect confusion, perhaps panic. They would receive neither. Instead, they would confront the consequence of underestimating someone who has already lost everything once. The rest of the day unfolded with an unfamiliar lightness. I trimmed the hedges, paid 2 bills, and organized personal notes into sealed envelopes. Control was no longer an idea. It was practice. Late afternoon, I checked my phone, 2 unread messages. The first was a generic spam notification. The second, from Miss Pierce, read simply, "The buyer's ready. We can close by next week." I read it twice, allowing the words to settle like clean stones. The system that tried to measure my competence had just validated it, and now the plan that began as defense was transforming into quiet retribution. Proof had been established, and with it came freedom disguised as paperwork. When night returned, the house felt smaller but sharper, stripped of illusion. Sanity, it seemed, was never the absence of fear. It was the refusal to let fear dictate sequence. The message arrived just before sunset. The property transfer had cleared. I stood by the window of my new place, phone in hand, watching the screen flicker with quiet notifications from the doorbell camera I'd left behind. Each alert was a pulse from the life I had just outgrown. The first clip appeared a familiar car turning into the driveway. Adam Dalton stepped out, followed by Elise Dalton, both carrying luggage, and the ease of people who believed control waited for them inside. Their movements were casual until the first attempt to open the door. The handle resisted. Confusion, then impatience, spread across their faces. Elise gestured sharply. Adam tried again, his shoulders tightening. The camera caught the realization as it arrived. The locks had changed. They spoke to each other, lips moving fast, hands pointing toward the mailbox, the doorbell, the camera. I couldn't hear, but I didn't need to. Guilt and disbelief share the same choreography. Adam pulled out his phone, likely calling me, but the number would only echo into disconnection. He tried again, then threw the phone onto the porch railing. Elise bent down, retrieving a white envelope taped beside the doorframe. She unfolded the paper and began to read. The camera's lens captured every twitch, every breath that betrayed understanding. I had written only what was necessary. The acknowledgement of what I'd heard, the sale confirmed, the possessions stored elsewhere, the instruction to collect them peacefully. No insult, no threat, just the closure they had earned. Adam leaned in, reading over her shoulder, and something inside him broke in a visible way. He turned toward the yard, hands in his hair, pacing like an actor who had forgotten his line. Elise followed, gesturing sharply, her face hardening. Betrayal has a way of rearranging alliances. Theirs began to fracture in real time. He pointed toward the camera, shouting words I could not hear but could easily imagine. The expression that once belonged to my son was gone, replaced by the raw face of consequence. Elise stepped back from him, arms crossed, the letter crushed in her fist. Their partnership had been built on convenience and calculation, and now the foundation was dissolving. The video feed recorded them circling the porch like trapped figures, searching for an exit that no longer existed. Minutes passed. Then a patrol car arrived. Someone had called the police. 2 officers stepped out, calm, procedural. I watched as they spoke, checked identification, and confirmed the legal ownership through their database. When they returned the IDs, their posture changed. They no longer faced a homeowner, but intruders without a claim. Adam's body slumped. Elise turned away, staring into the street as if another reality might materialize there. One officer gestured toward the envelope still in her hand. She gave it to him without resistance. He skimmed it briefly, nodded, and returned it. Procedure satisfied, they left the pair standing alone on the porch of a house that no longer recognized them. The next notification came an hour later, Adam loading boxes into the trunk of their car under the indifferent glare of the porch light. Elise stood near the gate, silent, her eyes fixed on nothing. The letter lay on the ground between them, crumpled but legible. Days later, the consequences rippled outward. A contact from the school district reached out to confirm what I already suspected. Elise had been placed on administrative leave after a complaint involving professional misconduct. Another message, this time from a mutual acquaintance, mentioned that Adam's brokerage had terminated his contract after an internal ethics review. The city has a way of punishing deceit long after apologies lose relevance. I archived each update without satisfaction. Justice, when achieved, is not an emotion, it's an equation balancing itself. They had wanted ownership, but ownership demands integrity. Without it, everything collapses under its own falseness. That evening, another motion alert blinked across my screen. Adam stood once more before the camera, face close to the lens, his expression carved from exhaustion and rage. His mouth moved, shaping words that the microphone didn't need to capture. I could read them anyway. Blame, accusation, the refusal to accept accountability. I muted the feed and let the silence settle. Their voices would fade, but the record would remain a clear, dated sequence, proving that actions have witnesses. I closed the app and set the phone down. Outside, Tampa's night hummed with distant life, a reminder that the world doesn't stop for the ruin of two people who mistook love for possession. I didn't feel triumph, only distance. They had taken everything sentimental and tried to weaponize it. In return, I had given them what they truly deserved, the absence of me. The air in my new apartment smelled faintly of salt and lavender. Morning light crept across the floor, soft and deliberate, like a visitor that understood boundaries. The routine had already taken shape. Coffee, news headlines without sound, a slow walk to the balcony. From there, I could see the Gulf shimmer beyond the palm trees. Tampa carried its noise elsewhere. Here, quiet had finally learned my name. Weeks had passed since the sale closed. The funds sat secure, divided with care, some for living, some for the scholarship I'd established under my wife's name, the Linda Dalton Memorial Fund. Paperwork turned grief into structure. I wanted her kindness to outlive the chaos our family had become. A single endowment could send a student further than guilt ever would. One morning, a letter arrived from the county clerk. It confirmed what I already knew but needed in writing, a permanent no-contact order against Adam Dalton and Elise Dalton, effective immediately. The words were sterile, yet they carried an odd tenderness bureaucracy signing its approval on my independence. I placed the letter in a binder labeled Freedom beside deeds and receipts. Days moved easily. I filled them with small rituals, morning walks, crossword puzzles, quiet dinners at the community dining hall. People here spoke kindly but never pried. Most of them carried private wars under polite smiles. There was comfort in anonymity. It asked nothing in return. News of Carl Benson reached me through a neighbor who still read local business reports. An investigation had revealed his involvement in forged signatures and unauthorized document handling. The brokerage suspended his license pending review. I felt no victory, only confirmation that rot spreads quietly until light exposes it. Consequences, once earned, travel on their own schedule. Sometimes I caught myself expecting a call that would never come. The phone stayed silent, yet memory remained insistent. Fatherhood doesn't dissolve with betrayal, it just stops expecting gratitude. I thought of Adam as a child, building wooden towers on the living room floor, his laughter filling spaces that later turned hollow. Love, I've learned, is not undone by anger. It's replaced by understanding. In the evenings, I often sat by the window with a notebook. Not to record events they were already carved into the legal fabric, but to understand what had shifted inside me. Revenge had never been the engine. It was survival rearranged into clarity. There is a difference between wanting someone to suffer and ensuring they no longer have the means to harm you. I had chosen the latter. I looked through old photographs one afternoon, the kind printed before everything lived in screens. My wife's face, frozen mid-laughter, carried no judgment, only that steady warmth that once anchored the house. I whispered a promise to her, not of forgiveness, but of continuation. The past could rest now, because it no longer had power to repeat itself. Later that week, an envelope arrived from Miss Pierce. Inside was a final statement of sale and a brief handwritten note. Your diligence made this easier than most. Take care, Mr. Dalton. I folded it neatly and added it to the file. Closure, I realized, rarely arrives with emotion. It comes disguised as paperwork that no longer needs attention. Evenings here end quietly. The residents play cards, trade stories about children who still visit or pretend to. I listen without envy. My silence isn't empty, it's earned. There's peace in no longer chasing explanations from people incapable of honesty. When the sky darkens, I step onto the balcony again. The water glows faintly under the last light. Somewhere out there, my son and his wife are learning what loss teaches best, that possession without respect is a temporary illusion. Their story continues without me, and that, perhaps, is justice's purest form, the absence of return. I close the balcony door and pour one final cup of coffee. The reflection in the glass shows a man older, smaller maybe, but unbroken. Everything taken from me has been replaced by something quieter. Certainty. People think revenge is about fury. They're wrong. Real revenge is patience wearing the face of grace. And as I turn off the light, I understand the truth that took 70 years to earn. Justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet goodbye.